Why? The great question. What is it all for? Why do we even exist? What is the meaning of life? Throughout the ages, and especially in our present day, this question has such a reputation that many, if not most, treat it as if its answer is hidden somewhere behind the shadows of the stars, locked behind a lifetime of experience, or is simply impossible to find. Yet it's not. Its answer is available, right now, to plain human reason. And it's for this reason that, in the end, the question is not, can we ever know the meaning of life? No. The real question is, once you know the meaning of life, would you be willing to accept it? To show all of this in our study, we will move through a number of stages. 3 stages. The first stage is about understanding the question itself. What is it, and what are the limits of our answer? The second stage is about finding the answer itself. What, then, is the meaning of life? And the third stage is about the question of acceptance. Why might accepting it be a challenge? And where do our choices leave us? We're going to strike a balance here between being clear and concise, between being philosophical whilst avoiding too much of the philosopher's jargon, whilst hitting all of the essential points. Still, we're going to cover a lot of ground, and this will be fairly dense. For that reason, some viewers might want to digest this one part at a time and come back later. They will be bookmarked. Others, of course, will want to tackle the whole thing at once. Whatever the case may be, let us now begin. Part 1. The question. It all starts with choice. The question of meaning only makes sense because we can make choices. And we ask the question of the meaning of life because we want to make sense of our choices. Are our choices meaningful or not? And why? You cannot escape this fact. Even if you think choice is an illusion. A full-fledged determinist might say, but no, there is no such thing as choice. Everything is already determined and we should just accept it. Which, of course, entails that we can choose to accept this determinism or not. And so, either way, choice exists. Yet our choices don't float around on separate islands. They form a structure. More specifically, they form a hierarchy. Each choice we make and goal we pursue in turn serves a higher choice and a deeper goal. I'm going to get some food. And why are you going to do that? Because my body needs food and I don't want to be hungry. And why do you care about that? Because I want to be comfortable, and most importantly, I don't want to die. And why do you care about that? Now, that is the question. All of our choices are like this. We work so that we can earn money, so that we can buy things, so that we can be more comfortable. We spend a lot of time socializing because we want to form relationships, because we want to feel human connection. And we might party for the pure and simple desire to feel pleasure. But even then we can ask, why? And so, whatever the goal may be, even the larger goals like pleasure, connection, comfort, or survival all come back to a point. Why? And without an answer to this question, we can get an underlying sense, a very rational sense, that all of our other goals are, ultimately, baseless. They are all, ultimately, meaningless. This model isn't new. Aristotle described it over 2,000 years ago, with the recognition that all of our goals and choices lead up to something else. And at the top of the hierarchy, he named a purpose which justifies all other purposes, which needs no justification, because it perfectly justifies itself. And he called this purpose Eudaimonia, a term which is sometimes translated as ultimate fulfillment, and which literally translates to the state of true being. And it has to be one meaning in the end, There cannot be more than one eudaimonia, more than one meaning of life. Why? Because it would make chaos of our decisions. And like a man who tries to walk north, south, east, and west all at the same time with the same intensity, the result would be paralysis. We would simply stand still. We speak of one goal that stands above all because it justifies itself, and we move through all other choices because they move towards that goal. You have the goal of being wealthy, and to do this you could try to work as much as possible. You also have the goal of forming human connection, and to do this you could focus on socializing as much as possible. But if both goals are your ultimate goal, both are self-justifying, and both are as important as each other, what do you choose? If you socialize, you sacrifice wealth, and if you work, you sacrifice connection. And so you're in a deadlock. The only way to resolve this is to organize your goals. You might, for example, say that, well, having a better social life makes you a better worker, which also makes you more wealthy, in which case wealth becomes your highest goal and connection is used to serve it. Or you could say that having more money allows you to do more things with your friends, which places connection at the top. Or perhaps you say that increasing your wealth and deepening your human connections work together. They are both important because they mutually work together to create a better state of being for yourself, which brings you back to square one. Your goals come together to serve a higher single goal. And so, to be able to move towards any goal, the entire structure of our goals and choices must converge on a single point, whether we clearly understand this point or not, and whether we are even conscious of our choices or not. At this point, then, we have deduced that all of our purposes come back to a point, whether we call that eudaimonia or something else. It is this point which is the meaning of life, or at least the answer to it, the purpose which gives meaning to all other purposes. Of course, we still have a lot of questions open, not least, what can eudaimonia truly mean? But for now, if we see that our choices all come back to a single goal, a single point, and that this point is the meaning of life, there are three options to consider. Either A. This is an illusion. There is no meaning of life. The final purpose which justifies all the rest does not exist. B. Whilst there is meaning, there is no inherent meaning. It is arbitrary, relative. The ultimate meaning of life shifts from person to person, and perhaps even from moment to moment. And C. Life has real, inherent, objective meaning. And so, let's consider these three options in turn. A. Life has no meaning. This is simply illogical nonsense. To begin with, as we have seen, it would make chaos of all of our goals by rendering them all void or in fundamental conflict with each other. If there is no self-justifying meaning at the top of the hierarchy, which in turn gives meaning to all else, then all of our actions are indeed meaningless, and there is no reason to do anything. Or you may conclude that all goals are self-justifying, which leads to the same problem we saw above. If all goals are self-justifying, there is no way to prioritize. The only really rational conclusion of this position is either paralysis or, unsurprisingly, suicide. But let's be clear, it is not rational to hold this position and also speak about it as if it's meaningful, or to argue with anyone about truth, or meaning, or morality, or anything else for that matter, because if someone chooses anything other than paralysis or suicide, they are admitting, at least with their actions, that something really does matter, whether or not they understand it or consciously accept it. And so, this option only really entails the three possibilities: paralysis, suicide, or hypocrisy. And finally, to be clear about one more thing, to say that suicide could be the meaning of life is also fundamentally irrational. It's a way of stating that meaning is ultimately meaningless, a serpent which eats its own tail. Although it's no surprise that acolytes of this idea, which we might also call a faith in chaos, follow their master into the void. B. The meaning of life is arbitrary. Under this model, there is a meaning of life, but it doesn't ultimately matter which one we strive for. Whether we say that the ultimate meaning is wealth, survival, connection, or pancakes is all the same, because whilst life has a meaning, it is not inherently meaningful. This option is also fundamentally irrational because it's yet another way of saying that meaning is meaningless, but the reasons are less obvious. Let's think it through. When we come back to the goal above all goals, we know that it must be self-justifying. That is to say, even before we fully understand what the goal is, we can at least know that it has some quality which makes it automatically and necessarily meaningful. Therefore, to call this goal arbitrary would be a contradiction in terms. To say that this goal can be swapped out, changed from person to person, is to admit that there is nothing in these goals that is inherently meaningful. And so, this begs the question. If one person or another thinks that connection, or survival, or pancakes is the ultimate meaning of life, what makes that goal meaningful? It cannot be the goal itself that makes the goal meaningful, and so where does the meaning come from? In answer, we have two options. You can either say that this highest goal lacks inherent meaning and gets its meaning from nowhere, that is to say, that meaning itself is baseless and meaningless, or you're back to square one and you have to say that these goals get their meaning from something else, some other goal or higher principle. One might, for example, state that this principle is the freedom to choose itself. Choice itself is what makes the goal meaningful. The freedom to choose is the meaning of life. But then, is this principle inherently meaningful? If not, and this too is arbitrary, we land back in the same logical problem. An infinite regress in which one form of meaning always begs the question of where its meaning comes from. Recognizing this regress, some people might conclude, well, then in the end, each person's quest for meaning is itself the meaning of life. But this isn't rational either. It's completely irrational, because if nothing is inherently meaningful, the quest isn't either, and it's coupled with an admission that this perpetual quest will never find anything that actually matters. Therefore, the meaning of life cannot be arbitrary. The idea is fundamentally irrational, meaningless, and another example of a blind faith in chaos. But before we move on, there is a brief point to make about pancakes. We of course do not want to argue that pancakes are meaningless. We are simply arguing for their proper proportion. As Socrates immortally said, quote, "Whilst we cannot claim that golden, buttery pancakes are the measure of the universe, it is nonetheless clear to reason that they can stand as a strong pillar for an upright and virtuous life." And so, now that we've seen that it's irrational to say that life is meaningless, or that the meaning of life is arbitrary, we can consider option C. Life has an inherent, objective meaning. This is the only option that does, or indeed can, make any rational sense. This is the only option that allows meaning to be meaningful. All of our goals, all of our purposes, all of our principles come back to a point. And this point, secure in its own objectivity, proving its own importance, not subjective, not arbitrary, not wistful nor baseless, but anchored within the very nature of reality itself. This can be truly called the meaning of life. The lingering question, therefore, is, and so, what is it? Part 2. The answer. What is the inherent meaning of life? How can we even know? The first thing for us to recognize is that whatever the meaning of life may be, it must be connected to order. We know this because the complete negation of order, chaos, is ultimately meaningless. Order is about the principles and patterns that arrange things, that arrange relationships, beings, facts, ideas, and existence itself. And so, what does order tell us about meaning? The way a thing is ordered tells us what a thing is and what it can be, including what it can do. Let's take a flower, for example. The parts of a flower are arranged in a particular way. The flower has a particular, indeed we could say a defining order to it. The parts, the cells, the DNA, the pollen, the proteins, the chlorophyll, root, stem and petal all come together to form a particular being with a particular range of activities. It can grow, reproduce, beautify and nourish. Left to its own devices, there is a range of things a flower will do according to its nature. However, left to its own devices, there are a number of things a flower will not do. It will not sprout legs, stand behind a podium and give a public speech. It will not fashion a rocket and fly it into space. It will not build a cathedral. We might say that a flower can be placed on a podium, be sent into space, or adorn a cathedral. But note that none of these possibilities come from its own nature. These are all possibilities added onto it by human interaction. Left to its own devices, according to its own order, its own nature, there is a particular range of things a flower can and cannot do. Now, when applied to the hierarchy of goals, we can ask, what are the goals of a flower? And therefore, what is its eudaimonia, its highest goal, its meaning of life? And as we can see, the highest goal for a flower is to simply reproduce. How do we know this? Because this is what all of its other activities lead to. It grows, digs roots, spreads out, nourishes itself on water and sunlight, and advertises itself to the world so that it can spread its seeds and be pollinated so that more flowers can grow. Given the very nature of a flower, this is its ultimate goal, the end towards which it is moving. It will cycle through this goal again and again until it dies. The inherent order of a flower determines that this is always the goal that it will at least aim towards, even if it cannot achieve this perfectly in all situations. Even if the flower cannot reproduce or even grow because it lacks nourishment, it will still aim towards these things. Its actions will be on pause until the nourishment is restored and it can move closer to its goal again. Therefore, we see how the order of a flower determines its nature, and therefore its activities, and therefore its goals, and therefore its meaning. Of course, it might seem a bit odd to speak of flowers having, quote, goals, because they are not beings that choose. They don't deliberate over the, quote, meaning of life. Not because there is no meaning, but because there is no question for them. The fact of their existence, of their order, and then their meaning all come together for the flower as one and the same thing. Humans, on the other hand, are different. That is why the question itself even has a significance for us. Humans are also ordered. In many ways, we are ordered similarly to plants. But unlike plants, humans have two special capacities: the ability to know and the ability to choose. Whereas plants will simply be what they are and pursue their purpose unto death, humans get the sense that, prior to death, we can still somehow miss our purpose. Indeed, we can choose, but this also includes the ability to choose wrong. This is the entire reason for why the meaning of life even presents a meaningful challenge to us. Humans are ordered, but part of our very order includes the ability to be aware of our own order, aware of existence, and choose different paths of action. But then, doesn't that make chaos of the whole thing? If order is what entails purpose, and our own order allows us to pursue different goals, don't we return to the conclusion that the purpose of humans, therefore, is simply to pursue different goals, despite all of the nonsense that this entails? The answer is no, because although we have the ability of choice, this ability itself has a certain order to it. And we can deduce this all from reason. Humans can choose, and humans can know. And so, what is the function of these two abilities? The function of knowing is to know what is good. For example, that's what we're trying to do right now. And The function of choice is to choose what is good. This is absolutely certain, because before it is unpacked by any particular philosophy, the good is simply defined as that which is desirable, or we could say that which ought to be chosen. Also, the two go hand in hand because you cannot make a choice unless you know on some level that there is a possible choice between alternatives. Therefore, the function of knowing and choosing is to recognize the good and to pursue it, and to say otherwise is simply irrational. All philosophies, religions, and moral systems agree on this point. Indeed, they must do. Even if we flip the general idea of what goodness is supposed to mean, a satanic system would still recognize this as true, but would simply argue either that sin, or what is commonly called evil, is in fact good, desirable, and ought to be chosen, or whatever a person happens to desire at any level is the final measure of goodness. And so all systems assume goodness, they just differ about what it is. Therefore, whatever goodness may turn out to be, we at least know from reason that the human ability to know is in order to know what is good, and the human ability for choice is in order to choose what is good. That is the nature of their order, and therefore their function, and therefore their meaning. We know this from reason, but there is more that we can know from reason. We can also conclude that if something ought to be chosen because it's good, the more good something is, the more it's worth choosing. And if we have a hierarchy of goals, the more good something is, the higher priority it should have. And because our goals do form a hierarchy, they must do, and because that thing at the top of our goal hierarchy must be the meaning of life, it follows that the meaning of life is the highest possible good. Therefore, meaning is entailed by order and function. According to its order, the function of human reason is to know the good, and likewise the function of human choice is to choose the good. Human goals form a hierarchy. The top of that hierarchy is therefore the highest possible good, and therefore the meaning of life for humans is to use their reason to know this highest possible good and to choose it. The lingering question therefore is, what is this, quote, highest good? Can we know it? And does it even exist? The answer is yes. We can know that our highest possible good exists, and we can know this from pure reason based on a single, universal, and undeniable fact. The fact of existence. We can say existence without needing to add any other qualifiers. No arguing about whether we mean material existence or spiritual existence, or the world, or, quote, the universe. No. Before we talk about matter or mind or reality, perception or illusion, the only fact we need recognize is existence of any kind, which is proved categorically by this very sentence. That, paired with reason, demonstrates the highest good. How? Because there are only two possible kinds of existence: necessary existence and contingent existence. We could also say that there are only two possible kinds of beings, because by definition, a being is simply something which exists. A contingent being is non-necessary. It does not need to exist. It is not self-existent, and therefore draws its existence from something or somewhere else. We would otherwise call this caused existence. Whether we refer to, quote, life or motion or power or energy, whether things happen forward in time, back in time, or outside of time altogether, it nonetheless follows that a contingent being draws its existence, its power, its life, its energy from somewhere else, even if this be another contingent being. The cart is moved by the horse, who drew its energy from the hay, which was in turn fed by the sun, and so on. The problem with contingent existence is that, just as it does not cause itself, it doesn't explain itself either. Whether or not you consider contingent existence as a chain or a field or some kind of multi-dimensional fact, reason still entails that the fact does not entail itself. If contingent beings always draw their existence and energy from somewhere else, from whence is the origin? And if we answer that this is another being which is also contingent, we do not answer the question, we simply move it. The question must therefore be resolved by one and only one possible recourse: necessity. If contingent beings exist, but always draw their existence from somewhere else, there must be a being which is finally and ultimately non-contingent, which has the full plenitude of potency, of energy, of existence, in and of itself. This we therefore call the necessary being. The necessary being settles reason. It no longer begs the question. It is irrational to ask, but where does the necessary being draw its existence from? Because it is the source of all existence as such. If existence is a chain, the necessary being is not one more link in the chain, but the very principle that allows the entire chain to exist as such, even if the chain were ultimately a kind of a loop. But again, we are already leaning away from the core of the argument. We need not discuss anything else. Reason alone tells us that there are only two possible kinds of existence: contingent and necessary. And therefore, because contingent existence does not entail itself, but necessary existence does, if anything exists, a necessary being must exist. Yet, how do we get from this to the notion of the highest good? From the idea of completeness. Any possible quality that can possibly exist must draw this from somewhere, and because contingent beings must always draw the origin of their existence, the source of their existence, from something else, the necessary being, it therefore follows that the necessary being contains all such qualities completely, in the utmost abundance. If strength exists, the necessary being is the source of all possible strength. If intelligence exists, the necessary being is the ultimate source of all possible intelligence, and so on and so forth. Therefore, the necessary being must be complete. It cannot lack any quality, so that it can give these qualities to all else. And no, this doesn't include things like weakness and stupidity. This is just a trick of language. Weakness is a lack of strength. Stupidity is a lack of intelligence, and so on. It is also for this reason that we must conclude that the necessary being is perfect, in that the necessary being lacks nothing. After all, to be necessary is to be absolutely non-contingent, and so to not draw any part of its existence, or even any possible part of its existence, from anywhere or anything else. If there were the slightest defect, the slightest gap, if the necessary being lacked even a modicum of power in some way and needed to gain that power from somewhere else, the necessary being would therefore be contingent, and the entire thing would be rendered nonsense. Human goals, whatever they may be, must still aim towards some part of existence, either some quality of existence or some combination thereof, such as strength, truth, justice, or beauty. Even if we say the meaning of life is to be something, to be a certain kind of person who enjoys truth or justice or peace, we are still saying that a person is aiming towards some quality of existence. Again, this is a rational necessity. It could not be otherwise. It therefore follows from all of this that perfection itself, this perfection that we have been describing, is the highest possible good for humans. Even if we as humans cannot become truly complete in a cosmic sense, like the necessary being itself, it still follows that our good consists in pursuing this perfection, or even attaining as much of it as we possibly can, whether we do that mortally or continuously throughout eternity. And so, let's recap where we are. We have deduced from reason alone, and if you like, from the simple fact of existence, that humans pursue goals and these goals form a hierarchy. Whatever goal is at the top of this hierarchy is the meaning of life. The highest goal, the meaning of life, is inherent and objective. Our inherent purpose, and therefore our highest goal, is entailed by our inherent order. Our inherent order entails that we ought, to the best of our ability, to know and choose the highest possible good. This is our highest goal. The highest possible good is perfection. Any form of existence entails the existence of a necessary being. The necessary being is definitively perfect. Therefore, the meaning of life is to choose the necessary being. Now, before we really settle our conclusion, we have a couple of extra points to unpack. There are a few more things to consider about a necessary being. The first is that there can only be one of them. The one necessary being might have different facets and aspects, but there cannot be multiple necessary beings which are essentially separate in any way. Why? Because if there were two such beings that could be meaningfully separated in essence, it would mean that the one lacks the other, and would therefore not be truly complete, and therefore be contingent. And so, there can be one and only one necessary being. The second thing is that, of course, this being cannot be contained in any way. If this being were contained by, say, the material universe itself, it would mean that it is constrained by it, and therefore contingent upon the boundaries of this universe. And therefore, the being must be boundless, which we would also call transcendent. And thirdly, the being must also have a personality. The necessary being cannot be a mere mechanical fact or force, but must be a knowing, living entity with the power to choose. Why? Because the very nature of choice is that it gives a being the capacity to direct its own actions, to ensure that its actions are not merely dictated by external forces. If a necessary being lacked choice, all of its actions and power would not be determined by it, but somehow be determined by something else, making it contingent, which would be irrational. And so the only logical conclusion is that such a being must be personal. And so, the highest possible goal, the meaning of life, the necessary being, must be perfect, transcendent, singular, and personal. Now then, of course, we reach the final conclusion and the main barrier. Not by changing any of the reasoning, not by throwing in any new assumptions, but by changing a single word. The meaning of life is to choose the necessary being. The necessary being is perfect, transcendent, singular, and personal. A perfect, transcendent, singular, and personal being we properly call God. Therefore, the meaning of life is God. We can conclude this from reason alone without any appeal to any other authority. This is a conclusion that can be reached without any appeal to any special history or any sacred text, or indeed before we discuss any particular creed or religion whatsoever. Indeed, to say that any of these things disprove the conclusion is to get the argument back to front. If one were to argue that God cannot exist or cannot be the meaning of life because there are religious disagreements, because a doctrine seems unsound, or because a religious text doesn't make sense, is all to put the cart before the horse. None of these challenges and questions would, in themselves, disprove any of the reasoning thus far. The hierarchy of human goals, the nature of choice and perfection, or the existence of a necessary being. If the reasoning thus far has been sound, this is the conclusion we must reach. The meaning of life is God. Nonetheless, many, if not most, will not be satisfied with this answer. On the one hand, it is hardly new, and not surprising. We have not reinvented the wheel. We have reached a conclusion that has been proclaimed worldwide for centuries. Then again, we didn't need to. As you can see, if we can reach this conclusion by reason alone, the answer has, at least in some sense, been in front of us, all of us, for this whole time. And on the other hand, after centuries of discourse, and in the modern age especially, this idea tends to have a bad taste. It feels loaded with all kinds of implications that people are not comfortable with. But, as we said at the beginning, the question is not whether we can know the meaning of life. The question is whether we can accept it. For that reason, we will now move on to the final part of the discussion. We have the question, we now have the answer. Now we will explore acceptance. Part 3. Acceptance. The meaning of life is God. We could also say the meaning of life is to love and serve God, but more on that in a moment. First, a note about the question. Why is it even a problem? As we have seen, the question can be answered by a process of reasoning alone. Some might complain that this extended presentation, while certainly not as complex as some philosophy books, is still complex enough to not be universal. Therefore, is this meaning really only evident to people with particular thinking abilities? Not really. We moved through an extended discussion about hierarchy, meaning, rational order, and necessary existence. But for most people, this argument can be summarized as creation has a creator. And the idea that the creator would somehow be of the highest importance has been pretty easy for people to conclude at all levels of intelligence. And so, an extended rational discussion like this is only really needed for people around the middle or upper end of the IQ curve. The existence of God and his significance are plain to reason, but talk of God can raise enough questions for the modern mind that many barriers are placed in the way. What is the nature of these barriers? The first is the rational one, which we have hopefully addressed. If we remove talk of God from talk of religion, hopefully we can see how talk of God as such can be concordant with reason, and not merely based on blind faith. Then, of course, there is the issue of religion more generally. This is admittedly much more complex, although it's not impossible to sort out. The problem on the face of it is that, for us moderns, religion has a tendency to just seem so irrational. To begin with, we have a plethora of different religions with a variety of competing claims, or just their own claims that seem to go against what we know of life and the universe. It is a world of clamorous, warring claims which can seem very irrational from the outside. And there is a sense that if we say, "I believe in God," we are stepping into that world, placing our mental integrity at risk. Yet, just as the meaning of life is a question that at first seems impossible but turns out to be soluble, so too is the question, what is the right religion and how do we make sense of it? Indeed, there are extra steps, but far less than most people might think. It is a discussion which is far too much for this video, and so will be saved for another day. But the key point to mention for now is, we continue along the same path, with our reason. And by applying this consistently, we can get to where we need to be. If reason takes you as far as God and the meaning of life, the answer is not to stop, but to keep going. Then there is the issue of what might be demanded of us. After all, if God exists, as we have seen, he is not merely neutral or mechanical. He chooses. He cares. The question does not flow in a single direction. If God exists, if he is the creator and ultimately the meaning of life, he is not only a consideration in our lives, but we are a part of his universe. There is hence an underlying sense, yes, a rational sense, that recognizing God not only entails recognizing what he means to us, but what we must mean for him. If the meaning of life is to choose God, what does this choice entail? And most importantly, what change does it require? In the face of this question, people might feel an understandable reluctance to encounter God in thought and in fact. Following all of this, I would therefore recommend 2 questions. These questions are not to be answered publicly. To answer them before humans is completely meaningless. They are to be considered privately, completely within the bounds of your own heart. The first question is this: if you could ever speak to God, would you? And the second question is this: if you were to learn that God exists, and if you were to learn that God wants to create some kind of change in your life, would you let him? Everyone intuits that this is not merely an intellectual exercise. As we have seen, the meaning of life, by its very nature, is a goal which frames and gives significance to all else that we do. Thus, change the meaning, and you will, at least potentially, change the entire structure of your actions. It's no wonder that people are not willing to change their mind about this on a whim. But as we have seen, the meaning of life is not a whim. If you are following reason, we find that this meaning is something quite real and quite significant. Hence, the question is not only, can I accept it, but should I? And we should consider what is entailed if the answer is no. Again, hopefully the reasoning has proven sound. If not, that's one thing. But if it has, what does saying no entail? Can you just make your own meaning of life? We've already seen what that entails. That's irrational. We cannot say that anything is better than the highest good, nor can we say that anything is better than the necessary being, nor can we say that any other meaning of life would replace this highest principle connected to the very nature of reality itself. Yes, we do see people try to pursue all kinds of other goals, but they are demonstrably lesser goals to lesser ends. If reason holds, we are left with one particular answer, unless of course one tries to argue that there is in fact still an unknown meaning of life which we don't yet know and that defies reason. But if someone wants to uphold the value of reason, all of this, saying no, would hence render them a hypocrite. And if they would deny any kind of faith and instead hold out for a meaning of life which they claim is unknowable and irrational, they are betraying a completely baseless faith, a completely blind faith, a faith in pure chaos. Finally, we have said that the meaning of life has one particular answer, which might give people the notion that the meaning of life is therefore grey, austere, utterly uniform, as if we must therefore all become the exact same person. Does not this answer remove all the colour from life? No. Just because the meaning of life is one, doesn't mean that it's monochromatic. It may well be possible for people to pursue this goal in a near infinite variety of ways. Everyone could be unique, even if everyone were part of the same religion. Choose God, know him, even serve him, but perhaps the meaning of life is to do that in a unique and particular way that only you can, according to who you are, in your particular time, in your particular place, with your particular personality, set of skills, and position in life, which will, nonetheless, be filled with all kinds of surprises. Whatever the case may be, the question of accepting the meaning of life is a distinct topic in itself. And in the end, no one can force you to accept it. Sure, maybe some people can force others to say they accept it, but that's not real acceptance. That is something between the inner workings of your heart and, dare we say, God himself. Whilst the ultimate meaning of life is fixed and we cannot change it, we are nonetheless free to choose our actions and to decide what we pursue, whether something higher or something less. Hence, in the end, this presentation has not been an attempt to settle the meaning of life finally and without any possibility of rejection. The ongoing question of accepting it begins afresh with each new life and will ebb and flow in the human heart until the end of time. Instead, the purpose of this presentation has been to at least apply the mind to the question, and see how far we can get. Perhaps something has been missed. Perhaps there's been an error. If not, we can see that life does indeed have a meaning. This meaning is objective and universal, and can be accessed universally by human reason without any special knowledge or experience. We all must have goals. All of those goals must come to a point, and given the very nature of our reason and ability to choose, our choice should be aimed towards the highest possible good, and that can only be one thing. The meaning of life is God. All else is secondary. If anyone would like to learn with me, there is the TVC Academy, where I offer courses and private lessons on reasoning, language skills, and more. And there is also TonyVCLow.com, where you can see my public profile, blog, books, and other works. For updates on my activity, you also have the option to subscribe to my mailing list. Thank you for your time.